Greetings and welcome. Anyway, there you go. Welcome to the lesson Xerxes Council of War. So, before doing anything on the PowerPoint, what I would like to do is have a crack at noting and annotating the kylix of the Triptolemus painter. It's a separate attachment to the lesson, and you will see the Greek warrior towering over the defeated Persian, the interior of a kylix. And I'd like to annotate as instructed. So as always, it's the difference between Greeks and barbarians. But do remember with this kylix, a couple of things. Remember, it's created at the height of the war, so there's a lot of emotion poured into those depictions. But also the way it would have been drunk. So the picture of the kylix is the sort of bottom of the pot, or cup, if you like, and as you drink it, you would see, especially if you're drinking red wine, you would see these figures emerging from this kind of swishing, bloody, or red winey mass. So it could have been quite a powerful, quite cool thing to drink out of. So anyway, it's not a 15-mark question, but do spend about 10 minutes on it. It's a set image, and it's a bit of a classic, and it hasn't come up in the exams yet. So who knows? But anyway. So have a go at that as instructed. So the next thing I would like you to do is to pause the lesson and answer these questions in written form. So these it's quite a good little knowledge test, if you like, because you absolutely must know the answer to all of these. And if you don't, then it's probably because you've skipped a bit of a lesson or not done something properly. Maybe you've done it properly, but it needs a bit of a refresh. So anyway, treat it as a test, treat it as a research activity, do whatever it is that you need to do, but you do need to be able to answer these questions. So why did Darius want to invade Athens? How did the Athenians respond to Darius's demand for submission? What happened to Mardonius in 492 BC, and where did it happen? That's crucial for later. Why did the Athenians win at Marathon? See if you can come up with 3 or 4 reasons. What happened to Miltiades after Marathon? And what stopped Darius from trying to invade again? Now, arguably, there's 2 answers to that, but really number 6 is what other part of his empire was giving him trouble? So stop the lesson and have a go at answering those questions. Right, so moving on. Just a quick few ideas. Now, these are things that we've talked about a little bit before, but it's important that you've got a really good understanding of some Greek political ideals. And remember, the Greeks are a weird and wonderful bunch. We go from radically democratic Athens to monarchical Argos to whatever weird system the Spartans have, a gerontocracy, a government of the elderly, a gynocracy, a government of women, according to Aristotle, whatever system you want to attribute to the Spartans. These things are common to all Greeks, although they do vary ever so slightly in manifestation. So first and most importantly is isagoria, the freedom to speak in a political context. So you are allowed to stand up and express your political opinions without getting your head cut off. Now, for the Athenians, this can be done in assembly. Obviously, for the Spartans, you'd be able to do this on a more personal level. You couldn't stand up in the Apella and give a speech as a normal Spartan, but you could express your political opinions outside the Apella. You could talk to your king, you could talk to your friends, you could debate, you could discuss, you could have political conversations without any sort of arbitrary punishment, one might argue. The next thing that's crucial is freedom under the law. So you're all governed by the law, and the law dictates what you can and can't do, not the arbitrary whims of a tyrant. A king cannot cut your head off just because he doesn't like you, and a king must obey the rules. And so if you're obeying the law, you are free. The next thing to understand is freedom. So eleutheria, probably a bit more of a general sense of freedom, but perhaps best thought of as a kind of freedom to be Greek. So the Ionian Greeks were not free because they had Persian overlords, and so they couldn't control their own political systems. However hands off the Persians were in reality, the Greeks were still not free, and that's an essential part of being Greek for some Greeks. Obviously, Herodotus points out many exceptions to that. I think the fourth thing to really get your head around is citizenship. So the Greeks are a member of a polis, a member of a political body. It varies in how it appears, but they're all there, they're all members, they all, free male Greeks obviously, take part in one form or other. Now for the Athenians, that's everyone being heavily involved in politics. For other Greek cities, it would be, they would have less direct involvement, but they have rights and responsibilities as citizens and members of the polis nonetheless. The fifth, perhaps most importantly, is the accountability of, most importantly, I keep saying that, I think I've said that for about every single one, but anyway, a very important one, especially when looking at Xerxes and the Persian kings, is the accountability of officials. So remember, poor old Miltiades, well, I say poor old Miltiades, you know, he embarks on what seems to be a kind of personal pirating mission, and this fails and costs the Athenians a huge amount of money and some lives, and so he is punished. He's taken to court and prosecuted, and it's only dying that stops him from being convicted and exiled. So this is something that Athenians can do to officials. And remember, the ephors can easily take out a Spartan king if they are misbehaving. So there's all sorts of checks and balances and accountability, irrespective of which system you are using. So these are important kind of little foundational points because we're now, well, in a minute, we're going to compare them to the Persians. Now, what I'd like to do now is have a look at Professor Harris on Masslit, and it is lecture number 5, I think, debate in the assembly. And I want you to think about how an Athenian assembly should work and write down as many ideas as possible. So what should people say? What should people do? How should people act? What is the sort of purpose and process of debate? I would say there's about 5 or 6, really key points, and I'd like you to see if you can identify those. I mean, maybe you could get up to 10, but it's really the kind of principles and procedures and the way things happen, because again, we're going to compare this to the Persians. And when you do take these notes, make it very clear that these are by Professor Harris, because again, this is something you could use in a 30-mark essay, and you would have to attribute it to, Professor Harris. Now, you could easily finish this after 9 minutes 32. Feel absolutely free to go on and watch the next 2 or 3 minutes. There's a few more examples, a few more bits and bobs. Can't do any harm at all, but it's only really up to 9:32 that you need. So stop. This will take you about 10 minutes, depending on how you approach it. But if you do need to stop and start a bit more, then that is fine. But make sure you do that. Very good. So let's just have a little bit of a look at Herodotus now. Now this is an important little paragraph on Xerxes and Atossa, or Atosha, I think is how it's pronounced, to avoid in Persian, and also to avoid giggling. Now, a couple of things to think about. Who is Demaratus? How does he help Xerxes? And the significance of this last sentence: there was no limit to the influence wielded by Atossa. So stop, have a read. Can you answer those questions? Of course you can. So, Demaratus is an exiled Spartan king. Now again, this is interesting because it shows accountability for actions. Demaratus has aroused the ire of the people of Sparta and has been thrown out of his position as king. So he is accountable, and it's an interesting kind of counterpoint to Xerxes. Now he helps Xerxes by giving him some cunning Greek legal and rational advice, which shows you how rational and logical the Greeks are, and compared to the slightly uncivilized, naive Persians. So Demaratus says, when Xerxes is fighting with his brothers over who should be next in line to the throne, Demaratus says, well, it should be you, because you were the first person born after Darius became king, and the sons born beforehand don't count. So Xerxes takes his advice and wins the argument, although, as Herodotus points out, he would have been king anyway because of the influence of Atossa. Now, Atossa is a queen, and Xerxes' mother, Darius' wife, and this is shocking to the Greeks, isn't it? So a woman wielding this level of political influence shows how corrupt, decadent, and crazy the Persian system is, where a queen, a woman, can control men in this way. Shock, horror, awful. Ah. Good. So the next thing that I want you to have a look at is 7.5 and 7.6, and I want you to think about how within these passages, Herodotus characterizes the Persians as groups, and as individuals. Now, it's really important that you read these passages, pick out a few more points than I'm going to give you, but I'm going to give you some of the highlights, obviously. So stop for 5 minutes, however long it takes, jot down a few ideas about how they show the Persianness of the individuals. Now, just to point out, we haven't really got into the debate, the assembly bit yet from a Persian perspective, so Harris's stuff isn't necessarily particularly relevant to what's going on here. Xerxes will call a council in a minute. So, well, this is interesting, this conversation between Mardonius and Xerxes. It shows all sorts of things. It shows the nepotism of the Persian system. So Mardonius, as a cousin of Xerxes, is given this great position. Now, obviously, that just wouldn't happen in Athens, at least in theory, and would be hard to happen in Sparta, given the kind of complex system of who joins what assembly when and for how long. So the idea that you just promote your cousin to a leading position is quite un-Greek. Now, Mardonius manages to persuade Xerxes to invade Greece, but Xerxes doesn't want to, and this is an important part of Xerxes' character. He's constantly changing his mind. He's easily argued in and out of opinions and positions by individuals. He's really arbitrary. He's not fixed. He's quite childish and sort of intellectually immature in so many ways, unlike the complex, powerful Greek characters like Demaratus, who we'll see in depth later on, Miltiades, previously debating with Callimachus, and obviously Themistocles, who is a really significant Greek character, who we'll see later. So let's see. So one of the reasons Mardonius persuades Xerxes to invade Greece is this idea of Greece being a fertile land, well endowed with every kind of fruit-bearing tree, super rich. It's an amazing place, and that's not true. Certainly compared to Persia, Greece is tiny. Greece is rocky. Greece is, relatively difficult to farm, and it's not really that wealthy compared to the, the wild fertility and wealth of the East. So Mardonius is either an idiot or lying, but it shows this kind of the ease at which Xerxes is manipulated, but also that greed is such a fundamental part of being a Persian. They want more and more and more and more. And why is Mardonius doing that? Well, it's not for the good of the state, it's not for the good of the people, it's not for the good of Xerxes. Mardonius is trying to launch a war to become governor of Greece. That's his ambition, is to rule Greece as governor. So it's all about personal gain rather than the glory of the state or the community. Now, we then come on to a very interesting story at the bottom of 7.6, which is Onomatocritus, the Greek oracle who's also working, or Greek interpreter of oracles, who's also working for the Persians. Now, this is a classic little sort of demonstration of the way the Persian political system works. So Onomatocritus will only give good prophecies to Xerxes. When he hears bad ones or interprets bad ones, he hides them from Xerxes because he's afraid he'll be killed or get his head cut off. So any of these that contain portents of calamity to the barbarians, he did not speak. So it's, this is the problem with a lack of the freedom to speak. If you think you're going to get head cut off, you just tell someone what they want to hear. You don't tell them the truth, and therefore they can't make good decisions. So moving on. Now, what I would like you to do is have a look at this worksheet and see if you can have a look at 7.8. And again, I've put some key quotes. There's always more. What does 7.8 tell you about the Persians? How does it characterize them in terms of hubris, tyranny, cowardice, freedom to speak, excess, intelligence, all of these things? And really, obviously, we're focusing on characterizations that make them look opposite to the Greeks. So stop for 10 minutes, read 7.8, and then have a go at this. So this, by the time you've read 7.8, really thought about the analysis, written up answers, that could easily be 10, 15 minutes. So try and obviously use terminology that's appropriate. So isogoria or isonomia or eleutheria if you can. So stop for 10, 15 minutes or however long it takes, and complete the top box in the worksheet. Now, for this will probably be about the end of the first lesson, but I will just keep going, and we'll probably get into a kind of second lesson in terms of time, but I'll tell you when to stop. So let's have a look at Xerxes' speech. So let's think a little bit about some of the things that Professor Harris brought up. So when you're in an Athenian assembly, you don't mention your ancestors' achievements, you don't mention how much money you've spent, and you are trying to argue things on the basis of how good they are for the people, and not for yourself. And you also try and reach some kind of consensus. Those are 4 big points from Harris. Now Xerxes summons an assembly of noblemen. Now already the Athenians would have thought this was not a good idea, because this should be a decision made by the people, not just the noblemen. Although other Greek cities would have been less bothered, they would have been governed by assemblies of noblemen. So maybe more of a thing to horrify the Athenians than anything else per se. It's still Xerxes calling an assembly to sort of see what people are thinking, rather than to really reach a kind of rationed, debated outcome. But there you go. So Xerxes says, I want to avoid failing to measure up to those who preceded me. So he is motivated by the actions of his ancestors, and he talks about how they have been on this sort of steady conquest spree, and he too wants to conquer new land. So we're getting this, again, demonstration of Persian desire to conquer and take. So he then goes on to say, I've decided on a course that will enable us to win glory and a land equal in size and wealth. So again, it's difficult to know what's going on here, because Greece is a tiny sort of thumbnail and the Persian Empire is enormous. So the idea that Greece is in any way, shape or form the same size as Persia is so ludicrous. Does it show Xerxes as an idiot, or is Xerxes trying to manipulate his audience by sort of lying and telling them an untruth simply because he just wants to conquer? Either is possible. So he then makes the sort of bold and staggering claim, I will bridge the Hellespont. Now the Hellespont is the stretch of sea between Turkey and well, not quite modern day Greece, because Turkey sort of jumps into that European landmass, but it's the sort of the bit that sort of goes from the Mediterranean up to the Black Sea, and it's the sort of traditional dividing line between Europe and Asia, and it was the sort of dividing line between Europe and Asia at the time. So bridging the Hellespont is a very, very strange thing for Xerxes to do. It's a mile-long bridge, which is, completely insane. It's completely excessive. It's a kind of almost geoengineering project as far as the Greeks are concerned. But in terms of hubris, it is linking together 2 things that the gods have designed to be kept apart. So it is the ultimate hubristic action, and to sort of outwardly state it is absurd and bizarre. He then goes on to say, or point out that the Athenians burnt down the sanctuary at Sardis. Well, this is true, and it's not wrong, and Herodotus acknowledges, in a sense, that the Athenians should be punished for the hubris of burning down a god's sanctuary, even accidentally. And so Xerxes seems to have some sort of slightly positive, noble motivation, but really that drops away, and we see why he does it a little bit later on, where he says, then the limits of Persian territory will be brought to the border, blah, 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 of the realm of Zeus. So he is talking about taking over the whole world, and then comparing himself to Zeus. So Xerxes will have the whole world, and that will be comparable in size to the kingdom of Zeus. And it just doesn't get more outrageously hubristic than that. You just can't imagine anything more outrageous. So the mask really then slips when Xerxes says, it is not simply those who've wronged us who will bear the yoke of slavery. So then, even though previously he was talking about vengeance, the Athenians burned down Sardis, they've done all these things that are wrong and they should be punished. Some Greeks may see the logic in that, but this just shows that it's not even really true, because they're going to conquer everyone. It is not simply those who've wronged us who will bear the yoke of slavery. So they are going to enslave the whole of the world because they want to. And then finally he finishes with this idea of whoever brings me the best equipped contingent of soldiers will be rewarded. So it's a kind of competition to win the king's favour. It's not hoplites turning out for their city, for their duty, for their country. It's a kind of slightly weird competition as to who can bring the best equipped contingent of soldiers. It also does sort of point, in a sense, at the sort of Persian values and understanding. You know, it's not the bravest soldiers, it's not the most disciplined soldiers, it's the best equipped soldiers. So I kind of focus on the materiality, is that a word? Have I made up a word? Material nature of the Persians. So I'm sure there's more stuff in there, and I'm sure you've picked it out, but those are some of the key points that I want you to have focused on. So that is basically the end of the first lesson, depending on when you watch this video, but where are we? Oh God. So yeah, Monday the 15th of March 2021. 21? Yeah. So obviously if you're watching this in 23, then probably something we're on to COVID 24, and anyway, no, hopefully not. Anyway, so just double check that this is supposed to be the end of the lesson, but for the first time this video is used, this will be the end. Lovely, brilliant. So let us move on. So what I would like you to do next is obviously read carefully the next group of sort of chapters, and conduct the same analysis. So what does it tell you about the Persians and freedom of speech, and excess, and the character of Xerxes, and so on and so forth. Lovely. So there we go. If you're wondering where the Hellespont is, you can see the big green arrow. That's where Xerxes created his mile-long bridge, and we'll explore that in a great deal of depth later on. But if you look carefully at the map, you can see the route Xerxes is trying to take, with his army marching along the top and his navy kind of travelling next to it. If you look at the green line, that's the journey of Mardonius in 492 before his ships were sunk by a storm, and then the brown line, I think, is the where Datis and Artaphernes travelled to attack Marathon in 490. Moving on, let's have a look at some other elements of Mardonius's speech. So first of all, he starts with the most obsequious flattery of Xerxes possible. You are the greatest Persian who has ever lived, but there is no one in the future who will rival you either. So this is just absurd, obsequious flattery, and that's how one has to behave to a tyrant, to a totalitarian overlord. This isn't political debate or discussion, particularly, and it's this excessive flattery that's necessary to survive in this political world. Unlike, of course, the debate and cut and thrust of the Athenian assembly or some of the Spartan chambers. Now, Mardonius then goes on to brag about how they've enslaved all sorts of people throughout the world: the Assyrians, the Sakai, the Indians, the Ethiopians, and these are people from a geographic spread around Persia, which is really emphasizing the size and the scale and the variety of different people that the Persians have conquered. And yet they want more. They want the Greeks. They've got the Ethiopians, they've got the Sakai, they've got the Indians, the Assyrians. Why on earth do they want this little kind of rocky sort of peninsula full of mountains? And thank you. Sorry, dog's locked in her supper cage. So Mardonius then starts to mock the Greeks. Will they combine forces to make a large army? Do they have deep reserves of money? Sweetie, thank you. Sorry, she likes to eat the laptop cables. So, right. So, will they combine forces to make a large army? Do they have deep reserves of money? So, these are two quite interesting points, because Mardonius is judging success on size and money, and neither of those things are actually crucial to the Greek success. Mardonius does not understand that it is being part of a political body, being free, being Greek, showing manliness. He doesn't understand the reasons why the Greeks fight and the reasons why the Greeks are successful. And he goes on to say the Greek way of war is a thoroughly ridiculous one. When two cities declare war, they meet up on a plain and they clash, and even the victors suffer huge casualties, because he doesn't understand Greek bravery. He doesn't understand Greek manliness at all in any way, shape or form. He also doesn't seem to understand the kind of political importance of the phalanx and the hoplites and the kind of representation of the political body on the battlefield. He goes on to say the Greeks should use heralds and messengers to settle their differences. I mean, not necessarily a bad idea, but I think, again, one that points to his inherent lack of manliness. Now, Mardonius, again, he just doesn't understand the Greeks, because he goes on to say that when Xerxes appears by these Greek cities at the head of the hordes of Asia, so again, emphasizing size rather than any kind of skill or motivation of freedom or duty, he says the Greeks will all give up and surrender anyway. So this speech of Mardonius is very important in terms of characterizing barbarians, because it shows Mardonius especially doesn't understand the way Greeks fight and why Greeks fight, and the way they fight and why they fight arguably leads to their victory later on in the war. So it's interesting that Mardonius doesn't understand this. So moving on, we go to Artabanus's response to Mardonius. So what I would like you to do now is to stop the video and have a go at picking apart Artabanus's speech for the next 10 minutes or so. So you've got some hints on the screen, but there are always a lot more things for you to explore and to go through. So stop this, 10 minutes, off you go. So let's go through some of the highlights then. So Artabanus's speech. Now this is, as you've probably spotted, this is a Greek perspective that Artabanus is putting forward. Now, let's sort of think about this logically. There's almost no way that there's no way that Herodotus would have understood what happened and what was said in a Persian council of war in the 480s. There's no way. He may, well, that's a bit harsh. He may have spoken to someone who was there. It's not impossible, I suppose. But realistically, Herodotus is putting words into the mouths of these main characters because he wants them to express Persian points of view or Greek points of view. And Artabanus, although he's Persian, really is putting forward some of the Greek ideals and showing you how they clash with the Persian ideals of Mardonius and Xerxes. So Artabanus starts off by saying, when a decision is to be made, it's impossible to pick the best one unless a variety of opinions are aired. So this is fundamentally, again, the cry for free speech. We need free speech in order to be able to explore all arguments and all options. It almost doesn't really get more Athenian than that. And already there's an issue because Artabanus can only speak because he is Xerxes' uncle, and it even says that explicitly. Everyone else was too afraid to speak, but Artabanus can because he's Xerxes' uncle and is therefore, in theory, safe, although that isn't actually how it plays out. He's almost threatened, he's threatened and almost has his head cut off. Now, Artabanus then obviously gives some sort of, he's there to praise the Greeks. You are about to go to war with men more formidable than the Scythians and whose reputation on land and sea is without parallel. So again, Xerxes is being warned by Artabanus that what Mardonius has been saying about how the Greeks are a joke is untrue. But Mardonius is pushing forward this idea because he wants to be governor, he's poor, he wants to be rich. It's all sort of poor motivations. Artabanus is pushing forward the truth. He then goes on to say, you can see yourself how it is creatures of an overbearing size that gods strike down with his thunderbolts. So Xerxes is being warned by Artabanus not to show the hubris that he's about to, and he refuses, Xerxes refuses to take any notice. So much like a lot of characters in tragedy, and it's, you can view Xerxes as a tragic figure, and he's, his portrayals do take from tragedy in both Herodotus and Aeschylus later on. And one of the key figures of a sort of tragic hero is excessive hubris. So there's a bit of a sort of literary tradition going on in people's depictions of Xerxes as well, which we'll explore later. Now Artabanus then turns to Mardonius and says, "Stop this nonsense you're spouting about the Greeks," and points out the sort of the danger of the Greeks, the power of the Greeks. But again, Xerxes will ignore it. And I think it's important to note that Artabanus is putting forward very reasonable, very true points of view. And what we need to consider is Xerxes' response to this. He doesn't argue logically against Artabanus. He simply threatens to have him killed. So, or says, "Well, I would have had you killed if you weren't my uncle." Now, Artabanus then goes on to show that actually he really is a Persian. And his suggestion is, well, let's invade Greece anyway, but let the king stay here while we pledge our children as sureties. So a surety means that he is, the children would basically be held as hostages in Persia for the, and that would guarantee the victory of the Persians in the army. So, this is an unusual motivation. The Greeks are fighting for their polis, for their freedom, and even Artabanus is suggesting that the Persians would be fighting because their children will be executed if they're not. So, fighting out of fear rather than any kind of loyalty or noble motivation. So that is Artabanus and his speech, and I'm sure there are many more things that you would have picked out. So finally, on to the next one, and that is Xerxes' last speech. And again, pause, read through for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, do more notes, more analysis in the column headings, and then we'll talk through it in a bit. So, as again, using this as a basis, I'm sure you saw the first thing, the only thing that spares you punishment is that you are my uncle. So, there are no real laws other than, Xerxes' family connections. He isn't given respect because of the arguments and ideals that he puts forward. Those are all dismissed, and the only reason he's not killed for criticizing Xerxes and going against Xerxes is because of that family connection. And Xerxes then goes on to say, "I hereby sentence you to the humiliation of staying behind with the women." So opposing Xerxes is punishable by this great humiliation, both for warrior, which would have been obviously humiliating, both for Greeks and Persians. Now, he then says, "If I do not punish the Athenians, I no longer rank as a son of Darius." So he's looking to, he's characterizing, not necessarily in a negative way, perhaps. He is seeking vengeance for the wrong done against his family, and vengeance is a sort of an important ideal for both the Greeks and the Persians, and he's doing this to sort of maintain his status. So, not completely unreasonable, perhaps. But then he goes on to say something really quite interesting. "We are locked in a contest in which we must either act or die." And there seems to be a kind of hint from Xerxes that he understands, at least in part, that there is this inevitable conflict between the freedom of the Greeks and the tyranny of the Persians, and these two systems cannot exist in the same place, in the same way, at the same time. We are locked in a contest in which we must either act or die. So perhaps a little bit of prophetic realization from Xerxes at this point. So, quite an interesting series of speeches that characterize the Persians. Now, moving on, a quick 10-mark question to finish the lesson. To what extent is Xerxes depicted as a typical barbarian? Now, I would like you to use the passages that we just read, as always, 7 or 8 extracts or points. You could break it up into 3 different characteristics of a barbarian. So does he show a lack of restraint? Does he show hubris? Does he show effeminacy? Or you could pick apart the sort of 7 or 8 different individual points. It's up to you. Do attach it to the assignment and hand it in, and I will see you in the next lesson.